A messenger would be sent around the corner, because the Echo in those days was just around the corner in Whitechapel. A messenger would be sent round to Sir Thomas Street with the news stories, and the news editor would then deliver these at the microphone. Again, very different from the kind of local radio we have today. A corporation office block in Sir Thomas Street was its home, the 6th floor of a very anonymous council building. People used to wander into the front desk to pay their rates, but didn't quite appreciate there was a radio station on the top floor. And a staff of about 20 people, producing really a bizarre kind of output. About 4 hours of local programmes a day, but interspersed with national programmes coming from London. So you'd have The World at 1, followed maybe by 15 minutes for dog lovers on Merseyside, and then Listen with Mother, and then maybe Terry Wogan or Pete Brady, someone like that. Then another local news programme, couple of minutes of headlines, and then they'd switch to another network. So a very bizarre patchwork, really, not the kind of local radio that we're familiar with in the 1990s.
Radio Merseyside, station where good things happen, swinging sounds of now. Radio
The BBC were quite right. Music was everywhere. Every pub, club and theatre featured an endless stream of bands and performers.
Well, flavour of the 60s was basically everybody had a job virtually. You could go into one job and out the next, you know. You weren't worried about jobs. And the music, in actual fact, was what was the lifeblood of Liverpool. Bands all over the place, amateur bands, everybody was in a band. Those who couldn't play basically tried to play, you know. It was just an amazing sort of, like a dream looking back. At the time, it was you're just trying to do something all the time. You're trying to be part of something, and that was basically the feel of the time. You know, the wanting to be a part of something, you know, wanting to be involved in something. But the lucky people who actually made it, not always the ones that actually hit the charts. The likes of the Vampires, the Dresdens, people of that nature were sort of big around the local. Like New Brighton, Wallasey, all the rest of it. You know, it wasn't just Liverpool. Wallasey and New Brighton had a very sort of big venture of groups. Again, in Wallasey, we used to have a lot of the, going quite back now, the Tommy Steele lookalike competitions in what then was sort of church halls, the scout huts. And that was sort of like 59-ish, sort of like that. And a lot of people then were sort of like moving up, and rock and roll was sort of in everybody's mind at the time, Lonnie Donegan and people of that ilk. And so when these sort of like lookalike competitions came in the small towns, i.e. Wallasey, New Brighton, etc., that was probably your first sort of glimpse at sort of rock and roll, or people that actually looked like your heroes or whatever. And it sort of gave birth, apart from the washdowns and you know, the basses and all the rest of it, it gave birth to, I want to be part of something like that. And then when the sort of the Mersey beat hit, which it started in a, as I recall, a very sort of smallish way, sort of the local groups and this, that and the other, but obviously the Beatles brought the whole thing to the fore. Well, most of it, I think people thought, what a lucky break. I mean, they were sort of plucked from obscurity, really, and it was an average band, really, up until the time that they sort of rocketed off. Jerry Marsden and the Pacemakers, they sort of like went along on the tailcoats, I suppose you could say, of the Beatles. And everybody else, like the Searchers, etc., they started sort of making it. Obviously, they went Tony Jackson, who was a Liverpool guy. There was the local heroes, you see, and people started to make a name for themselves in the local area. And I think it sort of, as time went on, people got past thinking, oh, we might make it to the standard of the Beatles. But I think really there was only one, you know, room for one actually band of that nature to go on. So everybody else sort of like either copied it or they tried to sort of like make their own sound up.
Merseyside was awash with musical talent. But one group sailed high above all others. 4 lads who changed the sound of pop music and changed the world. Bob Wooler was the DJ at the Cavern between 1961 and 67 and introduced the Beatles over 400 times.
I went there when rock and roll was coming in, and I started at the Cavern in January 61. And I continued at the Cavern until it went bust in Feb 66. And that's a rather tragic story because it was bad vibes all around when the coppers came in to lock the place up and shift the groups off the stage, stop the music, etc. So I got to know the Cavern quite well during my time there. I did the lunch times, the evenings, the all-nighters. I got to know the Beatles from December 60, and they made such an impact upon me. I was doing other venues as well, and I got them into other venues. So I had to get them into the Cavern, and I prevailed upon Ray McFall, who was the owner of the Cavern at the time, to book the Beatles for lunchtime sessions. Ray had a problem about putting groups on at lunchtimes because, unlike today, in '94, most of the groups were working and they couldn't get time off work, you see, but the Beatles were an exception. They packed their jobs in, such as they were. They'd been to Hamburg and they'd come back to virtually nothing. So they were glad of the work that the Cavern provided for them at lunchtimes, evenings, etc. By the way, as a matter of interest, their first lunchtime session, which was in February 61, there were 5 Beatles then. Stuart Sutcliffe was with them. They got paid £1 per man, and they insisted on the driver, who was Neil Aspinall, getting £1. So in total, they got £6. Now, I must relate that to their farewell performance 2.5 years later, when they played the Cavern August the 3rd, a memorable date, Saturday, August 3rd, 63, and they got paid £300. Now, you may think, perhaps, oh, that's not a mere nothing, a bagatelle. But in those days, in 63, it was quite a princely sum, and the idea of paying a group £300 didn't occur to us at all, I can assure you. Of course, things are totally different thereafter. The difference with the Beatles, we had about 350 groups on this scene in those days, and the difference between the Beatles and the rest was not their long hair, not their winkle pickers, not their leather jackets. It was the fact that they wrote their own songs. That was the most significant thing about the Beatles. And they wrote outstanding songs, which really none of the other groups could equal. Yes, Cilla Black worked in the cloakroom for 7 6pence, I think, a shift. And she used to ask me, when she did her stint in the cloakroom, she used to ask me if she could get up and sing a few songs. But I had to be choosy, be careful which group was on stage, because they had to know her songs. The big 3 knew her songs. Jerry and the Pacemakers knew her songs, and King Size Taylor knew her songs as well. So it depended which group was on stage.
It's funny, but everybody from Liverpool says they knew the Beatles. I knew the Beatles. But I really did know the Beatles. I worked with them. This is true, I worked with them. Way back in the 60s, I remember one particular night, we were doing a club called the Offerton Palace in Stockport. And we're on our way to Stockport, in the back of the van, Neil Aspinall driving. And John Lennon was writing down on the back of an envelope the songs that they were going to sing that night. And he's writing all the famous, well, they're famous songs now. And Ringo piped up and said, what about me? And John Lennon said, what about you? He said, well, I haven't got my song down. He said, well, I don't want your song down. He said, well, that's not fair, I haven't sung Boys for ages. And John Lennon said, there's a very good reason why you haven't sung Boys for ages, because you can't sing, and it's a rubbish song anyway, and you're not singing Boys, and that's that. So Ringo just shut up. We got to Offerton Palace, it was packed with girls, I went on and did my stuff. I introduced the Beatles came on and did their stuff, and they started playing great until about a minute into the song, and obviously something wasn't right. And he looked round, and Ringo was sitting there with his arms folded, and he hadn't brought his sticks on. And he just looked at them and he thought, I can't sing, boys. Well, to you.
As the decade drew to a close, many new features to Merseyside life were receiving the finishing touches. New shops, offices, nightclubs, restaurants, even roads showed how much the city was on the move. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Oliver were the opening attractions at the brand new Odeon Cinema, with Oliver star Mark Lester in attendance. It was a time when 1 and 6 would buy a pound of stalk margarine. A loaf was 1 and 2pence halfpenny. A pound of middleback bacon was 2 and 8, and oranges were 6pence or 2.5 new pence each.
Even as a grandfather at 60 years of age nearly, I still have the respect for the city. I wouldn't do nothing to upset anything in it. I wouldn't make a show of Liverpool. It's the greatest place there is. I think so anyhow. I'm not worried what anyone else thinks. They've got their own opinions, I've got mine.
Eye of newt and toe of frog, 6 spare ribs and a Mersey fog. Ringo's ringlets, Lennon's larynx, glottal stop from Scylla's pharynx. Anyone who had the heart? 1 wet Nelly, an Ollie and a Kewen, 2 large whites and a mother's ruin, a footy boot and a pint of ale, a warder's key from Walton Jail, the Liverpool Echo, the 1 o'clock gun, Punch and Judy, lots of fun, a smack in the gob, a clip on the ear, Sunday's saltfish, it's the gear, a tickling stick from Notty Ash, a dirty big dollop of sausage and mash, a stink bomb from the wizard's den, a splinter from the docker's pen. Stir it up and feed the house. Good God, Maggie, we've invented scouse.
The country's Prime Minister, 2 of the nation's greatest football teams, industry working flat out, tens of millions spent on new roads and new developments, the arts and theatre bursting with new talent, and the world's greatest ever pop group. Not bad for one city, but that was Merseyside in the 60s.